So we're gonna do some more sculpting. We should be able to get most of the, or all the sculpting done today. I also want to start to show you guys how to bake normal maps. Also, though, I'll probably do a little bit of baking of some normal maps, maybe a little more sculpting next week as we kind of finish that up and start to get to kind of doing some basic painting. Remember, we're down to the last couple weeks, and kind of want to get some color on this guy as well, and get some quick lighting and rendering done, so we have a basically completed project like we normally would. So of course, where we left off was in the last video. Of course, the sculpting menu is a great place to be. Remember, the first video is just called Sculpting, Troll Sculpting, so you can just kind of look that up on the videos. Remember, I've been using industry compatible, right? If you go to Edit Preferences, you can go to Key Mapping, you can actually pull this down to use industry compatible, and that sets it up to actually use a lot of Maya and Modo workflow quick keys, right? Things like Alt-C will actually do your edge loop editing or adding without having to right-click to get the edge context menu. Control-E for Maya will do extrusions. It uses 1, 2, and 3 for vertex, edge, and face mode, although technically 1 is edit mode also. 4 for object mode. And of course, like Alt-Left, Alt-Middle, Alt-Right mouse button will do your navigations. And of course, W, E, and R for move, rotate, and scale. And of course, there's these great tabs up here. Modeling menu, of course, has all your modeling tools: move, rotate, scale, W, E, and R. But if you go to sculpting, you'll see it actually kind of sets it up to show it in a better viewport, kind of more dynamic lighting for it. Remember, if you go up to here, right, there's actually this little not quite a triangle, but it almost looks like part of a triangle pointing down. If you click on that, you can actually usually by default sculpting is set to matte cap instead of regular studio, but if you click on the actual ball here, you can actually pick different matte capture ones, right, that have different looks. So it's kind of neat when you're doing some sculpting stuff. We can just keep it the default one because that'll work fine, but I do tend to prefer some kind of red wax ones when I'm doing stuff, but kind of up to you. There's no real right or wrong, just kind of personal preference. You probably don't want car paint. If you're modeling a car, cool, but if you're modeling a character, maybe not so cool, right? But remember, kind of that little pull down right here, just like that's wireframe, or no, that should be wireframe, but I think in sculpting it doesn't show it. But that's regular shade. That'll actually kind of show full material, so you get some shininess, and that'll actually do kind of like full rendering. This default one's fine though. But these are kind of like your 4 and 5 and 6 for textured in Maya. So you have those buttons right there. So like any software, once you get to know it, it's actually, particularly newest versions of Blender, quite good. Right? The overall new workflow features and interface stuff work great. So just kind of a quick reminder of that stuff. I just like to kind of reiterate those things. I've shown it in tons of earlier videos, but I want to make sure that you're getting it reinforced, all right? And of course, one of the things we did when we got ready for sculpting was we went to our modifiers. Remember that kind of little blue wrench right here? And this would be in the modeling tab also, right? You would see this right here. This is basically kind of like your properties menu, just like this is kind of like Maya's outliner. Your objects are there. You can turn the visibility off and on for them. Double click on them to label them, much like Maya's outliner. But this little add modifier little pull down right here, that's where you can do your mirror, so you can get symmetry, right? This is basically Blender's version of reasonably well working symmetry. So I did this in earlier videos, but if you're like, I don't know how to turn symmetry on, well, there are earlier videos to watch, but it's there, right? And I like to point it out again. There's a mirror. Just like Smooth Preview is subdivisional surfacing here. It works a little bit different in Blender, but not radically different. It tends to take a little more setup with the modifiers. But those will actually give you some features. The earliest videos, like the first video or two, kind of go over these. I think the second video blocking in the troll actually goes over how to use the mirror modifier and the subdivision surface modifier. Also, usually when you want to finish them up, like you actually want to apply a subdivisional surface, is kind of like Maya's smooth. You hit the apply button to actually apply it, right? Just like if you want your mirror to not be a mirror anymore and to just be one full mesh with both sides, you hit apply. That actually kind of makes the modifier real and gets rid of it. So it kind of applies it. It's there. It's finalized, if you will. But we added the multi-resolution modifier for this, right? That's for sculpting, multi-resolution modifier. And then what you do is you just hit subdivide and turn it up a couple times. You can see I've kind of got the levels up at the 4, right? So you hit subdivide and it kind of goes up some levels. And this gives you a lot more polygons, right? When I hit wireframe, it actually is wireframe, I believe. We just have to zoom in a lot more. And you see how dense it actually is? That's all high resolution sculpting is. That's all your multi-resolution modifier is really doing, is it's just subdividing it a lot. So there's a lot of polygons there. The cool thing is it can be applied later on. You can turn down the resolutions in other viewports. It tends to kind of always show it at a certain level in sculpting. But if you go to other viewports and you turn your preview down to like 0, it'll show it at its lowest resolution. You can kind of go up and down levels, delete the higher levels. So keep that in mind. This is going to give you some of your sculpting functionality. All right, so I'm going to click back on that one just to kind of make sure that's back to shaded. And I just want to do a little more sculpting with you guys today. Of course, one of the things we could do is, like we said, technically, if we want to, we could always try to play with the preview level to kind of go down lower levels. You'll notice it doesn't really show it in sculpting view. Rendering will kind of only go so far as well. So you kind of do have some of these options here. I find in the sculpting mode they don't kind of quite go up and down the way I want them to. Maybe it's just I'm getting fairly good with Blender, but I'm not a perfect expert at everything in it. But one of the things you can always do is you can always do further sculpting, right? So of course the brackets, right? Kind of next to P and kind of your above your enter, those little kind of, they look like little kind of clamper hands kind of thing. Those will be your ability to go up and down by units of 10. S, and then kind of, so if you hit S and drag it left to right, that'll kind of do it as well. And of course, in the sculpting menu, you have those controls right here. The amount it's going to sculpt out, the brush size, you can kind of drag it down if you're grabbing the blue. And you can also, of course, type in a number as well. There are shortcuts for those. And remember, control will inverse. So you see if I hold down control, I can kind of push in a little bit here to define some muscle. If you hold down shift, it'll smooth it, right? You see that's a great way to kind of soften out areas, right? So sculpting is really a combination of holding down control to push in, right? Shift to smooth to kind of soften and blend between the forms a little better, so you can kind of soften it so they fade into each other, blending them in. But even, of course, just do some more control there to define that muscle a little more. Shift. But of course, even left mouse button just does regular sculpt. And so this can kind of really help you to kind of develop further the forms. Control to kind of pull out a little more of the armpit there. Hold down shift to smooth and soften it. And this is really going to give you that ability to kind of come in here and develop these forms a little better. You can hold down control to kind of develop the kneecap a little more. Shift to smooth, soften and blend it. And even just left click, right? Just regular left mouse button will allow you to pull out, right? So your regular left click will allow you to pull out the surface. Control will inverse, and of course shift will smooth. Now the cool thing about those quick keys is those are universal, right? It does not matter what software you're doing it, right? I'm just holding in control here just to kind of push that in, a little left mouse button to kind of maybe bring the tendons out a little bit more there. And I can just kind of hold down shift to smooth them a little bit, just to, so it kind of fades them and blends them a little bit more naturally. So remember, at a core level, when you're just using something like the very top sculpt brush, which is your regular sculpt draw, really just push, pull, and smooth allow you to define the forms and have them blend and be subtle and fade into each other, right? Remember, regular left click, like just left mouse button, right, will pull out the surface. If you hold down control left click drag, it'll push in. Shift left click drag will smooth or soften or kind of fade or blend stuff. And these are the things that are going to allow you to kind of define these forms a bit better, right? And this is what high resolution sculpting is all about. It's defining those extra high resolution forms, right? I can kind of bring in a little bit here and maybe bring in a little bit of tendon out there, right? Hold down shift. And I'm not going to try to make this perfect, right? It's much more about showing you guys how to use these tools to kind of start to get these forms in here, right? Then shift to smooth a little bit. I was using control to inverse, right? We can even go kind of underneath right here, right? I can pull that out a little bit, hold down control to push in a little bit there. And you can see how we can kind of just develop these forms a little bit better, maybe a little bit more nuance there at the wrists. But remember, it's really just kind of, control to inverse, maybe a little bit of left mouse button just to pull out, right? And then shift, kind of smooth and light to kind of blend and soften those features a bit, right? So remember, it's kind of a combination of all these kind of core little things that are going to allow you to pull out and develop more and more form, right? Now remember, there are specific brushes in here. Like you'll see that you have, right here's clay, draw sharp, it'll kind of be a sharper pull out, clay strips, that'll kind of do something like this, right? That can kind of be interesting to do some stuff with. There's layer brush, inflate, blob, right? Crease, we saw that in the other video. Crease with maybe a smaller brush can allow us to do a little more wrinkling. Maybe make a smaller brush than that. There we go. And so crease can be pretty cool at doing like wrinkles and things like that. So you can kind of get a little more wrinkling through here if you want to. Shift to smooth, right? You can see how often you want to kind of soften these areas out, right? So if I really want this kind of getting kind of nice and trolly, right, and all wrinkly, we could do that, right? So remember, there's more than just the regular draw brush. That'll work pretty well a lot of the time for most of what you want to do, but you might find yourself really liking and wanting to experiment with some of the other brushes, right? And this is the kind of stuff that you can see bump map's just not going to do this effect as well, right? So there's lots of things a bump map can do well at, right? We've seen that in Mudbox. But when you're truly trying to bring in muscle form like we were doing in other areas, you're really trying to kind of bring in wrinkles and creases, sculpting and then baking into a normal map later on is just so much better. And you can see now we've got some kind of cool little sculpting there. If I wanted to, I can kind of maybe give a little bit of creasing to kind of the lower jawline. Not sure if I like that really so much. If we wanted to, we do a little bit on the neck. It's kind of up to you on how far you want to push it, right? To kind of develop these forms a little bit more. But take advantage of some of these tools. You don't have to go nuts, right? I'm not expecting you guys to do everything I'm doing for the sculpting, but I wanted to make sure that you guys were at least kind of informed, right? Kind of shown many of the basics for this stuff, right? So keep in mind that the crease brush is great at that. Regular draw brush can kind of be your workhorse, right? Brackets can kind of bring those up a little bit. I can hold down control to kind of push in to develop a little more of the deltoid there. Hold down shift to smooth to kind of blend and soften it a little bit. Probably do a little bit there as well. And you see how you don't have to necessarily have this kind of detail really fully in the base mesh, right? The basic form for the deltoids there. But the higher definition, right, particularly for video games, is going to be in the normal map, right? And so you can really kind of take advantage of developing form and anatomy a lot more just with tools like this, right? Now, some of the other stuff I wanted to show you guys in this video are going to be, I'm just saving, save often. Save a couple of different versions, right? There's nothing like having one version and then it gets corrupted and then you lose all your work and you go, oh, Mike, I lost all my work. And, well, guess what? Save a couple versions, right? You can save scenes as, right? Blender, just like Maya, if you go File, Control-S to save, just like it is in pretty much all software. Shift-Control-S is save as, right? So you can save as and say, I want to be Troll Sculpt 2, Troll Sculpt 3, right? Save a couple of different versions. It's always good to have that stuff, right? Save a couple of different versions. So yeah. All right. So now you can see one of the coolest things about Blender is, unlike Maya, it actually has quite good sculpting tools. These are quite good. They're up there with most other software, right? Kind of the 5 big pieces of software I know, really 6, that can do sculpting at a fairly cool level. 3D Coat, Blender, Modo, Cinema 4D actually, and of course Mudbox and ZBrush. Mudbox we're all familiar with because we're using it as our painting tools and occasionally our sculpting tools for some of you guys that have done the class with me for a while. But Blender actually has this built in, so we see not only is it in its current state quite an excellent modeler and quite good at UV wrapping, but it's got pretty good sculpting. The texture painting is not bad. It's kind of fairly close to Mudbox in its current functionality, so definitely good enough for us to get there, but that's probably one of the areas that needs a little more work, just like your topo tools have enough to get you there, but I kind of feel like those still need a little more work in Blender. But in its current 2.8 above state, Blender's shaped up in something pretty nice. So sculpting, quite good. Now the thing is, you can do other things with sculpting, right? And like I said, I'm probably going to do one more sculpting video, guys, for you next week, and another baking normal maps, and I want to do some baking of normal maps today as well, just to kind of get you guys seeing that, so I can kind of have it in 2 videos. The painting's not going to take us that long of videos, as well as the lighting, rendering, and creating materials. So we'll do a little more sculpting today. I'll show you how to bake out one of the normal maps for like the body, and then we can do a little bit of stuff on the armor, and baking some normal maps up next week. Alright, so one of the things I also want to show you guys is that not only can you just push-pull, right? Left mouse button for sculpt, control for inverse, shift for smooth, and then there's even some cool preset brushes like crease that can do some neat stuff. One of the things you can do is you can actually, of course, use textures with stuff, and I'm going to go over that in a minute. You can even do strokes, and I'll kind of talk to you guys a little more about strokes. We'll see it a little bit today, but we'll talk a little more about some of the other features for it on the next video, because I want to do some like rivets for kind of the armor clothing next week. That'll be kind of cool. So what I want to do is I just want to show you guys how you could use some images to do some sculpting here, right? So 2 ways you can do this. One, this is where Blender's not bad, but it's not, I don't know, maybe not quite as slick as Mudbox or ZBrush or Modo, but it's good enough, is loading in textures, all right? You really have to kind of go back to over here, right? So, on our right side, we kind of have kind of similar to Maya, right? Maya has its kind of properties and its history over here, its layer stuff. You know, in this case, you have the outliner as well, also, which is something very Modo. Although Blender's had this forever, so kind of, I think that was a matter of convergent evolution between the softwares. I don't think Blender really copied Modo, and Modo didn't really copy Blender. They just thought, hey, cool, right? Whereas some of the newest things you're seeing in Blender actually copied Maya and Modo, which is awesome because they do a lot of really cool stuff, and to see Blender have that functionality has just made me really like Blender quite a bit. So remember, you have kind of really all your property stuff here, right? Tool properties, render stuff. We're going to see this momentarily, actually, for baking out normal maps. Modifiers, right? That's where kind of multi-resolution, mirror, and subdivisional surface modifiers are at. But even material stuff, and we'll get to see this a little more as we go on as well. That'll be in a week or 2. But at the very bottom is what looks like a checkerboard, right? And this is where, particularly when you're in the Sculpt menu, you can basically bring up your textures. So in this case, what we have to do is we have to technically add a texture into Blender, but it does give us a browser, right? So basically, particularly if you want to start to load some images in the sculpting interface, you go to the very bottom of these guys right here, that little kind of reddish checkerboard. And you click on it, and it brings this up. And you see it says New. So what we do is we click on that New, and when it does, it brings this up, and it's set to texture. Usually at this point, you're good. But you see a little down here, settings, image settings should usually be open, but if it's not, it's that little triangle opens it up. Much like Maya has triangles like those, right? And that's the thing is, once you really start to know one software, particularly something like Maya, it's not radically hard to learn other software, because at the core level, usability, good user interface, right? Ease of use can differ, right? But the basics work the same. So kind of in the image area settings, which usually this will already be open, you can go to open, right? So there's new, but in this case we already have created a new one. So we just want to go to open. And this is where it brings up a browser, just like you would have in Maya, right? And in this case I can kind of go to some of these recent ones, although you'll notice you can actually kind of go out, right? So you can kind of, if you want to, you can create a new directory. If you want, you can kind of click on your drive itself. That's what I initially did, was click on the C drive, and then I went to kind of my folder where all my stuff at, art, and then there should be some texture folders in here, right? This will be up to you guys, right? It's one of those things you're like, Mike, I couldn't find that stuff. Of course you couldn't find that stuff. This is stuff on my computer, guys. You're going to have to, just like we did on the previous project, you have to use some of the textures maybe you already downloaded, but find some of your own, right? Textures.com, great place to start. And in this case, I can go to the textures folder and I can just find something that might be cool, right? Maybe animal skin here will have some cool stuff, right? And kind of see that there's some elephant skin stuff, right? So what I could do is I could maybe click on that one and hit open image, and it's loaded that image in, right? That's now loaded in. So that is available for us to use as a texture, right? So what we can do is we can do a couple of things with that, right? We can actually go to texture here, right? So at the very top, and it'll be here as well, right? If you go to kind of tool properties, you'll kind of see right there, right? All the same things, right? So if you go to actual tool properties, but for me, I like having this open here because these are all right up here, all right? So if you go to texture, one of the things you could do is you could switch mapping, and you see it's kind of already picked that texture also. If you click here, if there's multiple textures, you can kind of switch which one you want, right? In this case, I only have one. But once you kind of have that loaded in, any textures loaded in, they'll be here, right? You just click on that guy and they're there. But you can change the mapping type, right? Right now it's set to tile, which would do tiling like we've talked about for our room, right? But in this case, I don't really want that. One of the things I could do is I could switch to, say, like view plane, right? And with view plane on, I could then switch from texture, view plane, and it's already at the texture I like, right, to stroke. And right now it's set to space. So basically, you'll notice if I start to go in here and I start to sculpt with this, this is basically working like a stamp, right? So by default, if you just kind of turn on, view plane, right, instead of tiled, and I can turn the strength up for the brush so you'll see it a little bit more, right? You'll see it's basically working like a stamp, right? Now if you go to stroke, you'll see space is already on, and you just turn spacing up, right? And what that'll do is it'll give you a little more spacing. So by default, right, whatever image you load in the texture, if you switch the mapping type to view plane instead of tiled, which is the default, you have stamps. And if you go to stroke, by default, it's usually set to spacing anyways, the space. The spacing control gives you your space distance, right? Remember how we kind of had that in Mudbox for the texturing? So you can easily, if you want to, kind of control those things, right? And by default, it's set to 10%, so I can kind of just set it lower to have it a little more on top, right? So you can easily start to sculpt in that kind of stuff that you would expect to have in your Mudbox, right? Except you'll see that this is sculpting, right? We saw that with painting before, but guess what? Sculpting does it also. And it'll show more detail the higher resolution your sculpt set at. For this project, it depends on how powerful your computer is. My computer can handle more polygons than this. Some of you guys' computers can, right? Some of yours can't. Some of you guys might be doing this on a Surface Pro. So if you can't really do any image-based sculpting because it crashes, don't worry about it, right? This is one of those things I want to make sure you guys know how to do this, that you have a video resource to show you how to do this. For us, maybe just some sculpting, some muscle form, and a little bit of wrinkles would be good enough, right? Show me some level of sculpting to define some of the higher level details that you can't have in your low resolution version, your base mesh. If you don't quite get to the image-based stuff, not the end of the world, right? And of course, Shift will still smooth this, so if you want to kind of blend some of these areas a little bit or soften them out, right? Shift still works for that stuff, right? Now the thing is that you don't have to just use view plane. You'll notice one of the options in the mapping section isn't just view plane, but stencil, right? Now the nice thing is we have a stencil feature in Mudbox which does exactly this. So if I click on stencil, you'll now notice there's a stencil here. Now, where this is different than, say, Mudbox is you have to hold down right mouse button, right? So your right mouse button, right, will actually move this. So if you hold down right mouse button, it'll move your stencil. Now, if you hold down Control right mouse button, so it's all around right mouse button in Blender. If you hold down Control right mouse button, it rotates it. And if you hold down Shift right mouse button, it scales it, right? So right mouse button will move it. Control right mouse button will rotate it, and Shift right mouse button will scale it. Now, the thing you're noticing though is this looks like it's working as a stencil from Mudbox, right? And that's because that's exactly what it is. So if I want to kind of throw in a little bit of that more interesting wrinkling right here, right, we can do that. Get a little bit of that in there. Now, of course, I could go back into here. We could just set this back to, and you see how there's some controls here if you want. I can always set this back to view plane or tiled. That'll turn it off. If I want, I can hold down shift to smooth a little bit, right? So like I said, sometimes you want to blend it a little bit more, soften some effects there. But you'll notice how, basically, if you go to this little kind of red checkerboard here, it'll bring this stuff up here. Usually it'll say brush with kind of the new feature, right? You'll click on it, it'll create this, and then what you do is you kind of browse. Now you'll notice that there is the open image thing now, right? So you don't see new and open anymore, but there is kind of what looks like a folder, right? And you click on that and you can browse for other images to load in, right? So if I wanted to load this one in, this is now loaded in. And if I go back up to this texture one here and I click on that guy, you'll see that's there, right? So keep that in mind. If you wanted multiple, right, this might be where you would actually maybe do kind of a new one, right? So if you were to click on this one, right, new texture, and you'll notice that you can kind of click here and you'll see there's kind of a couple of them, and you can actually see how you can kind of swap back and forth there, right? And if we go back to texture here and click on that, you'll see they're both available now, right? So you kind of do have to load in multiple textures in here, right? But you can also kind of just browse through here. So this is kind of one of those things where it has enough of what you'd expect from Modbox, but like if you're used to Modbox's image browser or the Modo equivalent, a little bit nicer than Blender's, right? Blender's is not bad at that, but it's, you know, a little bit nicer in those packages. But you'll notice that we have stencils, right? So if you switch to view plane, you basically have stamps. If you switch to stencil, you have stencils, right? And your strokes can actually control those things. Now the nice thing is the stroke features in here are actually a bit better than in Modbox actually. This is actually more like ZBrush. So drag dot's cool, kind of see that the other day. A little bit of line, we'll see that kind of next week when I do some stuff in the armor. But the actual stroke stuff is actually better in Blender than it is in Modbox. So kind of cool, right? You have the ability to sculpt with stencils and stamps, just like you would in Modbox. You just kind of have to know where those features are at, right? And it really revolves around the red checkerboard here, loading in whatever textures, however many you need to, and then kind of, you know, switching between your textures here and whatever kind of feature, stencils or stamps are there, and then stroke just gives you spacing controls and a few other things we'll see the other day. Now, at this point, one of the things we really want to do is show you how to kind of bake a normal map to kind of finish this up for today, right? Now, if you remember the other day, the first video, the first sculpting video, I made sure that I had 2 copies of the body, right? There was the version that I added the high resolution to, right? That I added the multi-resolution modifier to. And then there's the low res body, right? That's kind of hidden right now. So if I uncheck that, you can kind of see the other ones right there now. And so you see there's actually 2 objects, kind of the original low res and the original high res. That's because the low res is what we want to bake a normal map for, right? So what I want to do briefly to finish this video up, and I'll kind of do it again for our next video, and you can actually do cage baking in Blender, and it's not that hard to do. You just would want a second body low, so you'd have kind of like the high res and then 2 of the body lows, and you can call one like body cage, and then you just check on the cage function to do it. But I want to keep it a little simpler for you guys, but it is there, and there are actually Blender videos out there that show you how to do it. It gives you a little more control, but since, you know, we don't have tons of fingers and toes on this guy, well, distance will probably work okay for us. Now, this is where it's a little easier to bake if you go to the shading menu, right? And we're not going to worry about how awesome it looks in the viewport perfectly yet, because we have to get full lighting in there to show it off more. But we have these tabs up here, right? And one of them is called shading. So I'm going to click on the shading tab. And you'll notice that this did bring up kind of the original kind of checkerboard grid we have, right? But you'll see it kind of basically shows us something similar to Maya's kind of hypershade, right? Now, of course, the kind of little red ball here, right above the checkerboard, actually shows your material stuff, and we'll see that a little more later on. Like I said, I'm going to do this a second time for next week. In this case, I'm just going to select on the nodes, right? So if you left-click drag on these nodes, it moves them around. And that's what's cool about shading, it brings these all up. Now I'm going to click on this untitled one because that's actually the checkerboard. I'm just going to right click on it. When you right click, it brings up options. I'm going to delete. Now I'm going to go to the body because the body actually has kind of its own as well, right? So you'll see if I go to kind of body low, you'll see that there is the untitled there as well. So I'll right click and I'll delete, get rid of that. And there we go, right? Now, if for whatever reason you have kind of these different materials on both, you can always kind of switch back and forth and pick which material you want, right? So whichever one you're on, you can always switch them, right? We can always pick to have kind of one material if you want to. Material 1, if you accidentally create a new material, right? All right, so in this case we want to bake a normal map. And that's where what we have to do is, one, we're going to select the high res first, and then we're going to shift left click the body low. You see how it becomes kind of orange? That means it's the active one. Now, this one right here is our material. We don't really need it right at the moment, but I want to make sure you kind of saw that. Way up here at the top, what almost looks like a microwave oven, right? It's kind of right below the tools one. If you click on that, this is actually a renderer. This is going to be important in a minute because this is how we have to bake. So what we want to do, though, is we need to add a new texture. And you'll notice there's a button called Add here, right? And you'll see there's an area called Texture. And you'll see what we can do is we can just add an image texture, right? Just an image texture. So if we go to the Add menu here, Texture, Image Texture, it'll create a brand new texture node that we can just kind of left click here. And what we can do is you'll see there's a new button right there. And you notice that Alt right mouse button will zoom in, right? And Alt middle mouse button. So just like in Maya, your navigation, Alt middle, Alt right, does the same kind of stuff in this viewport it does here. So what I'm going to click New. And I'm going to give this a title. I'm going to call it Normal Map. We'll call it Body underscore, say, Normal Map, right? And we're going to give it a resolution, right? Depending on if you guys want to, if you go to 4096, that's fine. If you want to go 2048, that's fine. There's no right or wrong there. Probably at least 2048, but if your computer really explodes trying to do 2048s, then do what you can, right? The default 1024 is fine. But 2048 should be good. If you want to do 4096, you can. And then we can hit OK, because blank's fine, right? Remember, this is how we could generate our UV grids, though, just to show them up. But in this case, we want a blank one. So we leave it blank. We'll hit OK. And there we go. We've got a new image here. And it's okay to leave this by itself. We don't have to plug it in quite yet. But we do want to get ready to bake this, right? Now remember, we select the high res first, and then shift left click the low res. So it's the orange one. So you select that second. We want to make sure to kind of be not on the screwdriver and wrench, but the one below it kind of looks like a microwave briefcase. This is going to give us our baking options. Now, Eevee is kind of its powerful interactive rendering stuff, and that's pretty cool. I still have to get better with it myself, but what we want to use in the rendering engine is cycles, right? So if you click on it, there's more than just Eevee, right? There is something called cycles. It's kind of like, I feel like their older rendering system, and that's where some of the baking features are at. So we do want to click on this one right here, and we want to go to rendering engine cycles, right? So we click on that pull down, and we go from Eevee, right? It usually says Eevee to cycles. And you'll see if we go down here to some of the further options, there's an area called bake. So I'm going to click on that triangle to open up bake. And the way we bake it is we hit bake, but we do need to set it up a little more, right? Right now it's set to combine bake, so it can bake a bunch of different stuff. We don't really want to do that right now. So I'm just going to click on bake type, and I'm going to pick normal. That's going to bake a normal map for us, right? And you see here's tangent space. You can do world object if you want to. So just kind of like how Mudbox could do that. Some of you guys have seen this before. Mudbox could do that. Maya could load in tangent world space. We're fine with tangent. Usually you want that for characters, creatures, things that deform and change shape. We also want selected to active. So you see how we click on that little checkbox to select it to active, right? And you can click on that triangle to open it up. If you wanted to use a cage, you would need a second low resolution mesh, right? And what you would do is you would actually sculpt. You could actually use your sculpting brushes, right? Just go back to sculpting, pick a sculpting brush like just the normal sculpt add normal brush that we're playing by default, sculpt draw. And you can just pull the shape out so that it kind of it matches or is bigger than the sculpt, the high-res version. And what that does is it uses the actual other mesh as your search distance. This is actually more powerful, more precise. Modo's got a version of it too that's great. Mudbox doesn't, and it bothers me. But in this case, to keep it easier for us, ray distance should work okay, right? Remember how we did have that in Mudbox for baking normal maps down? Some of you guys don't because you haven't seen it yet. But ray distance is basically how far it's going to search from the low resolution outward, right? Because we did sculpt on the high res and it did change the surface a little bit so they're not identical anymore, right? See how kind of they stick to each other a little bit? And that's what the search distance is controlling, right? Is it's going to search out from there on the low res. And the higher the search distance, the more it'll be able to get. But if it's too high, you can, basically it can put this finger on that one, right? And that's where using a cage could be a little more precise. We're probably, since we're not having tons of fingers, probably not going to worry about it too much here. But I'm going to say like a 0.4 for 0.4 meters. And that'll work pretty well as a rate distance. You can always kind of go back and rebake it a couple times if you needed with different distances, right? But we definitely wanted to click here, switch to cycles, right? The bake section we wanted to open up. Switch bake type to normal, right? The other default should be fine. We're probably not going to use cage here, but we did want to click on selected to active. And we did want to open this up, right, to do ray distance. All right, so once we have that, we should be able to just click on bake. And you see down here, kind of at the very bottom, you see texture bakes at 0%. It's going to probably take about 30 seconds to a minute. And you actually see the normal map here. Now, what's going to be really interesting is you're going to see the normal map's going to be predominantly purple, but it's going to have red, green, blue, magenta, teal. And what that is it's just giving each direction, right? The normal direction is just the direction your polygons face, right? It's really just the direction your polygons face. Some of them face this direction, some of them face that direction, right? And it's just kind of turning that into a colored pixel here, right? And you can actually see that there's the wrinkles, there's the kind of sculpting detail we did. If you see kind of this weird kind of pea green color, that's inside the mouth and the eye. It's pretty normal for those areas. But you can see how it actually did a pretty good job of baking a lot of that stuff, right? So we now have a normal map, right? It's been baked. One of the things we can now do if we wanted to is we can kind of turn the visibility off of the high res, right, and just select the low res. And we can just, there's a normal map image here, we can just kind of left click drag on the color dot, it says it's like a yellow dot. We can left click drag, and we can plug it into the normal section right here, right? And there we go, and you should actually start seeing the normal map on there, right? And it might not look terribly pronounced at the moment just because you might have a little bit of specularity on here, right? So there's kind of specular set to 50%. You can always turn that down to 0 and you'll start to see it a little bit better. Part of it too is the base color might be a little bright, so we can always kind of turn that down to gray to see a little bit more. And it doesn't really matter so much if it's not showing up super perfect in this viewport, right? That's just because kind of the default viewport shading node doesn't look super perfect right here, but this does bake down a good normal map for us, right? So there's our normal map, right? And it's great to kind of know that we have this ability to kind of do this, right? So kind of neat. All right, you can kind of see that the new image, open image, and if I click on open image, we can kind of see kind of where we're putting that stuff at, possibly, but that's how you can bake a normal map down, right? That's how normal maps get baked. Just want to make sure you guys kind of got to see that a bit. I think that'll be a great place to stop. We'll kind of do some more baking next week as well. So I think I'll stop there.